Today's lightning session, we're going to talk about managing up, and we're going to bring a real life case study of how to win or how to turn around your manager's perspective when, in the first place, the trust wasn't there. So, I'll do a quick intro of myself. My name is Mike. I also go by Mike Lawley on Little Right Notes, if that's the platform you came to know me about. And I used to be Amazon general manager and the director in global supply chain. And today I brought in a special guest, Amanda Tobin. Amanda used to work for me and used to report to me. Amanda, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. My name's Amanda Tobin. I'm currently a principal product manager for a software company called Everbridge that works in critical event management. But prior to this role, I was with Amazon for 5 years, working with Mike across operations, program, and product management. So now I get to support Mike doing conversations like this, which is exciting.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, cool. We'll briefly go through the agenda today. It's pretty self-explanatory. One thing I'd like to highlight is today Amanda and I are going to give a dual lens view behind the curtain of managing up. Essentially, it's from a manager's perspective as well as a direct report's perspective of how you can turn around a relationship with your manager. And I realize this topic, there's probably going to be more generic questions, which we're going to have a Q&A section at the end of this presentation. In the middle of the presentation, feel free to submit your question on the side chat panel. Amanda and I will answer the top upvoted question. Hopefully we can get to all of them, but if time is a limit, then we'll just select the top voted one. There's also probably more personal questions around this topic as you're going through or navigating through the relationship with your manager. In that case, I do offer a free 15 minutes consultation session. You can go to this page and there's a free resource section, and you can go ahead and click that and schedule a 15-minute session with me if you want to discuss with more complexity of the relationship you're trying to navigate through. Essentially, we're going to talk about when a relationship started with a wrong foot, how you diagnose the friction, how you neutralize the mistrust or distrust, and from there, how you rebuild your partnership and then scaling your relationship from there. We're also going to talk briefly when it is the right time to walk away. Um, and at the end, we're going to do a Q&A session for this audience. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the context and then give a quick intro of the relationship and with the timeline. And so we'll start from 2021 Q3. Amanda, her whole org got reorged and then moved under my team, and then she reported to me directly. And we went through some up and downs. She went from a direct report to a skip level, and through the techniques we're going to talk about in this session, she quickly regained the trust and became a proxy of me and going to different platforms and meetings. And she went from a skip level to become a direct report again. And toward the end, she promoted two senior managers and had senior managers nested under her org. And she was leading a global scope with over 160 employees with her org. And so we went from just a regular skip level reporting to direct reports to more of a business partnership now. So I started the entrepreneurship, and Amanda was one of the first people that I reached out to seek for help. So that's briefly the introduction of this. And I'm going to talk about how this relationship started. So Amanda came to my org as a middle level manager. She was already leading a not small organization doing a very niched business. So she got reworked into my team. And in the first half year or so, she was reporting to me directly. During this period of time, like she was doing very well, but I realized there's some communication polish that needs to be done, and she has very good raw talents, but just a little bit more time to be ready to take on a bigger scope. And so, from my perspective, to make sure like she can hone in the skills that she needs to take bigger scope, she was moved from direct reports to skip level. And I do want to understand, I know we kind of wrote it out, but from Amanda, your perspective, how would you describe that period? How did it feel like? And specifically, what are the things that you did to kind of diagnose what's needed and navigate through that kind of ambiguous period?
Yeah, so when this org change happened, myself and all my team moved into a different org and then under Mike's team. And there were a lot of differences, to say the least, in terms of structure and systems that were in place that were all good things, but just different from what I was used to, at least. And then I also had my promotion quarter bumped out a little bit too. So at the time, that was frustrating. And I was getting feedback that I hadn't gotten before, which I think people can relate to, being surprised, even if you agree with some of the context. And then I moved to being your skip level report after being your direct. So kind of went back to being nested under another one of your senior managers, which at the time didn't bother me necessarily, but as my peers started pointing it out, it became something I started to think twice of. Like they would say, do you feel like a sub senior manager? Do you feel like Mike moved you because he doesn't like you? And then those things can really start to get into your head and affect the way that you read into these types of conversations. So I started having to focus on what we call like radical objectivity, which is separating like what is being said from how it's being said. And if the feedback is coming from somewhere, it's their perception, which is their reality. And so you have to be able to unpack what's true and what's not and not be defensive in taking that, because at the time I very much was. And so then I quickly learned what didn't work throughout this situation as it continued to unfold, which are the tips now that I get to give to other people. So I was the sacrificial lamb for this, but starting with not venting to coworkers. So if you gossip to people on your team or in your building, it pretty much always gets back to the boss. You might think you have a friend and a confidant in situations with like a shared frustration, but if there's any kind of competitiveness or angle that someone wants to use to make themselves feel superior to you, this is a way that they will do it, is running and telling Mike what Amanda is saying and what they've heard. And then taking the feedback, sort of what I already talked about, from a non-personal lens. So really just look at the facts of what's being said and not reading into the situation. And then I like to use the analogy of keeping my side of the street clean. So in controlling the controllables, what can I do and how I show up, deliver on deadlines, and communicate proactively is all on my plate. So none of that can be blamed on Mike or on my boss at the time. That's 100% how I show up. So focusing on that helped a lot as well. And usually in these situations, the issue isn't competence or if you're able to do your job. Most of the time, you're promoted or hired because you can do the job as well as, if not better than, the current employee landscape. So it's figuring out how you can show that to your boss. So I was struggling on how to show Mike, like, I swear I'm good at this and I can do it. I just need you to see what I'm trying to accomplish, which is where the friction was coming from. And then in terms of what worked, so again, auditing the feedback and the mirror test, so looking inwards, something I did that helped is after a one-on-one, I would reflect if it was a positive, negative, or neutral experience, and then try to find concrete details that supported that and either avoid them or replicate them again in the future. So either paying attention to Mike's body language, or if he wanted to follow up on something to go deeper, that was usually a good sign. And then I could tell if, the one-on-one was more negative, not to repeat those behaviors in the future. Another what worked is watching my peers. So seeing how they would interact with Mike, and if there was any like work or approaches that would be taken from one of my peers and rolled out to the rest of the team, that was an indicator to me of what Mike was wanting to see in those scenarios.
Yeah. I think like the things that you talk about, reflecting on it, like I did notice like a I would say probably a dramatic difference, even though the things that Amanda talked about are very subtle. The differences are not small. And from my perspective, this goes into more of the neutralizing the distrust part with your boss. Like we started talking the same language. And to me, like I talk about data, like speed is important. And um, throughout the period, I started noticing a lot of the similar languages are being talked about. And Amanda also proved that herself is being very reliable. And this is like even before coming to my org, but there's more of self-promoting part that she was doing. And there were a lot more proactive communications that I was getting from her. And I think there's also like specific part that you can talk about, Amanda, later on of it became more evident to me that you became more open to my feedback. And I'd like to know kind of your perspective of like what are the things that you did, like particularly like the subtle steps that this audience can take away and can learn from you.
Yeah, so I knew I couldn't go from you not trusting me to trusting me. First, you have to get to the neutral ground of making you not distrust me, which was an important step in the right direction. And the first thing I did was learn your currency. So, what you value, like data and speed, are going to be, I think, pretty common across industries, especially in supply chain and tech. But also, like loyalty was important to you. And that showed up not just in the traditional ways we think of loyalty, like having someone's back in a conversation or in a personal way, but also in representing the business well. Since I was an extension of your team, you needed to know that if you weren't in a room or in a meeting, that your business was going to be represented well and that you could count on me. And so I was able to identify that those were sort of the three reoccurring themes of how you liked to receive communication and then demonstrate that consistency. And I also over communicating, I think, is always the better side to err on. So I think a lot of my frustration in the beginning was I just expected you to know I was doing a good job and was kind of having an immature mindset, thinking that out of the 800 people or 1,000 people that rolled up to you at the time, you were just going to know and trust that I was doing a good job. And I wasn't communicating to you like what problems were coming up or what like solutions I was generating, how I was connecting with the team or leading through change and like the self-promotion piece. So it was important to keep you up to date. And you would tell me like, hey, I trust you. You got this. You don't need to give me any more updates. But that was something helpful in letting you know that I had situations handled at the start. And then keeping the win log. So this is also applicable when we go into like talent review type seasons, but being able to document the things you do and the impact you have creates evidence where it's very hard for you or any boss to say you're not doing a good job when you have the tangible evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my part, like going into more of the partnership building, which is essentially the end state, the relationship you want to have with your boss. Um, from my perspective, I really need my direct reports to be able to connect with a broader audience, both internally and externally, and represented the big org with different circumstances or scenarios. And the timing was my biggest constraint. And so the person who reported directly to me, if I'm absent in the meeting, like they're basically the face of the org. And what I noticed from you was talking to your team, talking to my peers, and talking to my stakeholders, like talking about like directors and VPs, they've all shown like solid trust in you. And it's like not just one person, it was from different angle in different forums, on solidified feedback. So those are the like strong indicators that well, you're ready to take on a bigger scope and you're ready to be the face of the org when I'm absent. So that became a no-brainer that like based on the criteria I selected direct reports, you're the top candidates, and so moving you to direct reports position again was just a like a natural movement. But from your perspective, probably this audience could know how you navigated through from a kind of neutralizing the mistrust to like to me not distrust you to more of a partnership. How did you navigate through that period?
Once things neutralized, I would say this is where I went on the offensive approach and becoming more of your partner. So I knew if I was resourceful and helpful to you, that therefore you would like me. And I think it took me reflecting on myself as a leader of a large team and thinking about, well, who do I really enjoy having on my team and what do they do for me? And that's people who are reliable and make your job easier and who are consistent. And so I think when I realized that about my style of leadership, I applied that in the same way that we talked about your currency. So there's differences there, but like the general like themes and topics that people want to see is the same. And I knew that if I was, again, representing the business well and my team was operating efficiently, they were happy, we were delivering packages, whatever it was, that it makes it very difficult to say this person is not doing well. And that's where I was able to stabilize sort of the day-to-day execution component that in the past had been an area that you had mistrust, to coming to you with higher level like strategy and initiatives and asking your thoughts on how to go bigger with something or how to take a 98% benchmark to 100% and show you that I was also like leveling my expectations of myself and my team, which I had noticed was important to you in those conversations.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think from my side, there are a couple things changing my mind and really struck me. One big one that I could remember was like this is more applicable to people who you have either broader stakeholders outside your current team or you have a team underneath you that like your reputation is not just with your boss. Like in your case, Amanda, I think like your connection score at one point, connection score for a broader audience is how our previous company measure like your team's happiness underneath you. Like your connection score was for a long period, like the top of the entire company. And that reflected in either one-on-one conversations with your direct reports or roundtables I was holding and talking to your stakeholders, my peers. I think, how you led with me being absent was also evident to them of your caliber. So that started building more of a partnership between the two of us. And the last piece I want to talk about is how you scale from here. So once you become a partner, like your boss considered you as a strategic partner, how you take off from here to accelerate your career. And so from my perspective, like after going through this period that she is a cornerstone of the org, I could really rely on her on difficult situations, and I started becoming aware of issues through her first, either it's internal or external. And you usually bring in like a couple of options for me to pick. Like you didn't just bring in a problem or a situation. And because I think you brought in these like situations or information um, early enough, it bought me time to put together plans, or a lot of times I just pick one of the options that you presented. And the other thing I think this audience could benefit is you're able to like because you're the expert in what you do, and I think a lot of the audience are the expert in their domain as well. You're able to foresee issues, and whether it's from different team, potential friction with other teams, or potential system or parameters configuration of the setting. And when you start doing this more and more consistently, the question between me and my boss and the stakeholders became, how do we leverage your strengths to make bigger impacts? And like for the audience, if you can demonstrate this to your boss or to your stakeholders more consistently, it usually leads to a bigger scope or promotion conversation. You might be aware of that. You might not be aware because most of the things happen behind the curtain, but you'll likely get strong signals from your boss of, are you willing to take on more scope and then things like that. So that's from my perspective, what I noticed and how the conversation went with broader team. But again, what was your perspective during that period?
Generally speaking, I think that in our careers, most of our problems are either a people problem or a process problem. And when it's a process problem, it's usually repeating or restemming from like a system that's broken and how you're approaching your work. And so in this phase of our working relationship, I started to take a very self-critical look at everything I was responsible for, even when it was performing to standard, and asked myself if I had to go talk to Mike about this, what feedback could he come up with? So I already knew if you were going to poke holes in something, what it would be, and then had a plan in my head of what I would tell you I would do to fix it or make it better. And I think from my perspective and seeing how you would interact with me in those conversations, it expedited the conversation and you to be transparent, don't have time to listen to me come and complain to you about everything that's going wrong without a solution. So I knew you valued the time, and then having the data, like we talked about, to support my solutions made these conversations much more productive. And I could anticipate for a big change, like how the team was going to feel about it, but also how this was going to impact the business, which I think was a perspective that you started to value when before I wasn't communicating that effectively. And it seemed like I was like complaining or maybe catering to how people would feel about things too often. So that was a big shift for me in terms of our discussion. And then again, trying to stay one step ahead. So always thinking about either what could be better or what's going to be the next ask, even if it doesn't come from you. But if maybe a VP wants a different level of an audit, how am I already going to tell you I'll be ready for it? Or we can proactively share it to get good credit for something before it's something that we have to do reactively.
And I think um, there was a like a strong indicator to me that um, you're ready to take on my scope. That is, when there's an issue, either it's external or internal. I think before you were more of like, here, this is what's going on. What do you think? You were more asking me, almost like seeking for a solution. I think you switched to you sometimes will came in just like, Mike, I'm so frustrated about this. I don't have time to deal with it. And I just wanted to let you know and mostly vent, I'm gonna fix this. Either it's internal, like your team members' performance, or external, certain teams are not the most cooperative team that you needed to build more allyship with, or to have a like a more of a draw the line in the sand to kind of have a boundary. So those give me a lot of confidence that, oh, I didn't need to like do things myself or have those conversations or to have a conversation with you to let you see the issue. You already saw the issue way ahead of me. And you came to me either just let me know what's going on. You were not asking for a solution, approval or anything. And it gives me a lot of assurance that you're able to handle it. So to the audience, I think like those are the things I think in your arsenal or in your tool set that you can pull to really be the think tank of your boss once you neutralize the mistrust or distrust and start moving into more of the partner position. And the last part I want to talk about is when to walk away. So sometimes the crack between you and your boss, the relationship, is too big. And what we want to do is to intervene early before the story gets written without you. But the situation sometimes is unsalvageable because of either inaction or late actions. So in those cases, use your framework or use your network and your documented wins that Amanda talked about to pivot to a new department or even a company on your own terms. And the beauty is, you can learn from your mistakes and you move forward and try not to make the same mistake again. And that will wrap up the presentation part for today. Before we go into Q&A, if you want to go deeper into managing up and influence without authority, handling frictions with different teams, leading meetings, I do have two cohorts of my paid course coming up. Um, One is like upcoming next or a week and a half from today, and the one is the week after that. For people who are on this Lightning course, you will have 15% off by using the discount code. And you can find the class either on my Maven homepage or you can scan the QR code. And I do want to spend another 30 seconds talking about like a specific thing that Amanda and I offer in this class that no other class offer to our knowledge. That is the role play simulation. Um, so this class offers three real life scenarios that basically your role play with us, and it will provide you real-time feedback through quadruple lenses from director lens, non-native speaker lens, female lens, and a manager and direct report lens. Um, Surprisingly, not surprisingly, we got a lot of kudos and love from our students about the role play session. So if you're interested and then learn how to step out of your comfort zone with us guardrailing to create a more safe space for you to practice those vocabularies that we're going to teach and frameworks, this is a course you could take. Um, but let's dive into the Q&A session. I see there are a couple of questions already on the side. So far, there are only three, so we'll just do one by one. The first question is to you, Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Has Mike ever given feedback that was difficult to process? If so, how did you avoid being too self-critical when you reflect on the more negative experience with Mike?
Mm.
I can tell you I've definitely given feedback not just to Amanda, but to a lot of people that are difficult to process. I'm equally curious about your perspective, Amanda.
I think feedback that was difficult to process and hard to hear was that I came across as defensive. At the time, I genuinely felt that my team was doing their best and wasn't being treated fairly. So emotionally, that feedback didn't feel accurate, like we talked about at the beginning of this session. So what helped me was to realize that two things can be true. Like I can disagree with feedback or have an emotional response internally, but then still find that to be useful data and input from you. My intent was always to protect my team, and that ended up looking like I wasn't open to scrutiny from you or anybody like poking holes in the operation or what was going on. And so then once I separated those two components, I started asking myself, like I said, having a really high bar, like, is this fair? And if I was an outsider, would I say the same thing? And if it wasn't fair feedback from my perspective, how am I changing what we are portraying outwards so that you no longer have this perception or someone else on the team doesn't have the perception? But yeah, I can naturally lean into being defensive and protective of my team, but hearing that in like a larger setting and being more open to that feedback helped me, I think, grow and develop those leaders too.
Yeah. And I can talk about my perspective, not as a manager, but as a direct report to my different managers in my career. I've definitely been given difficult or critical feedback, not just once, not just twice, like along the way, quite a few times. And the first step that I usually take is to assess if the feedback has truth in it.
Mhm.
Like, is it truly that like, what's the message? Like, is it me not being competent, or is it certain way of communication? You kind of have to analyze and assess what that really is. And chances are, I see there are a couple of questions already on the side. So far, there are only three, so we'll just do one by one. The first question is to you, Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Has Mike ever given feedback that was difficult to process? If so, how did you avoid being too self-critical when you reflect on the more negative experience with Mike?
Mm.
I can tell you I've definitely given feedback not just to Amanda, but to a lot of people that are difficult to process. I'm equally curious about your perspective, Amanda.
I think feedback that was difficult to process and hard to hear was that I came across as defensive. At the time, I genuinely felt that my team was doing their best and wasn't being treated fairly. So emotionally, that feedback didn't feel accurate, like we talked about at the beginning of this session. So what helped me was to realize that two things can be true. Like I can disagree with feedback or have an emotional response internally, but then still find that to be useful data and input from you. My intent was always to protect my team, and that ended up looking like I wasn't open to scrutiny from you or anybody like poking holes in the operation or what was going on. And so then once I separated those two components, I started asking myself, like I said, having a really high bar, like, is this fair? And if I was an outsider, would I say the same thing? And if it wasn't fair feedback from my perspective, how am I changing what we are portraying outwards so that you no longer have this perception or someone else on the team doesn't have the perception? But yeah, I can naturally lean into being defensive and protective of my team, but hearing that in like a larger setting and being more open to that feedback helped me, I think, grow and develop those leaders too.
Yeah. And I can talk about my perspective, not as a manager, but as a direct report to my different managers in my career. I've definitely been given difficult or critical feedback, not just once, not just twice, like along the way, quite a few times. And the first step that I usually take is to assess if the feedback has truth in it.
Mhm.
Like, is it truly that like, what's the message? Is it me not being competent, or is it certain way of communication? You kind of have to analyze and assess what that really is. And chances are, and in my experience, predominantly is how I communicate, not necessarily about the expertise in my domain. And how I initially dealt with it at early stage of my career was to have a big reaction to it and then ruminate on it for days, if not weeks. And as I practice their feedback, what I realized through different trial and errors is because the feedback was on my communication, and changing communication is more of a subtle changes, like how you talk, the sequence that I talk, um, what do I talk? Like, is it adding too much noise or is it gaining trust? So once I either do like trimming of what I communicate, changing the sequence, and sometimes is how I carry myself. Is it confident? Or is it like leading to more confusion from people? So those subtle changes, once I did, the feedback almost, and I usually ask my boss, I put a lot of efforts on this. Are you seeing improvement in the past 2 weeks or a month? And what I realized is once I start doing the small tweaks, the perception changed quite a bit. So it's almost like a bullwhip or ripple effect. I change a little bit. It's like a pendulum. I change a little bit, and the perception on me changes quite a bit. So once I realized that, I started not ruminating or like self-draining emotionally on those feedbacks that much. Cool. We'll move on to the next question. How to decide the best form of communication with your boss in terms of giving timely updates, namely booking a meeting, email, texting, etc., especially when the boss has a very busy schedule. Do you want to take a stab on that, Amanda?
Yes, I'm thinking because I think there will be some nuance depending on like what platforms different companies use and how leadership likes to be communicated with. Uh, I think it's always better as a direct report to take the time that you need instead of expect your manager to like read your mind and schedule meetings at a frequency that you'd like. So, finding time on their calendar for one-on-ones if you feel like you're not getting enough like hands-on development or feedback. I think Slack or Teams, whatever modality you all use, it's better to send short, concise updates, especially if there's a big project or an escalation that you know your manager is going to have to speak to. It's better to over communicate in those situations. And then in general, I would say, in terms of like it says in here, meetings, emails, texting, I don't think I ever texted you, Mike, until there was like a very big outage where we couldn't communicate on company platforms. So I think it's best to, like I said, kind of own the time that you want. If it comes with meeting your very busy boss, but then send proactive updates and allow them to tell you, like, hey, I got it. I don't need this, as frequently as you're giving it and kind of gauge their reaction from there. But Mike, as somebody who had dozens of people that you met with on a weekly basis, what was helpful for you?
Um, I think asking them upfront early enough of what their preferred communication method is helps
Mhm.
me. Um, and so you get rid of the gray, ambiguous guessing game. You just ask them, hey, I know I'm new to the team. What's your preferred way of communicating? Is it through like things that you listed, Jane? Um, and then see what they prefer. And usually they'll be like, email works the best for me. And you can do a follow-up. What if it is an urgent issue? Do you prefer a call or text? I know different bosses has different preference.
Mhm.
And they'll say, oh, for urgent, just give me a call, and what's your phone number, by the way? And then they will give you your phone number, and then you just clear out all the ambiguity from there.
I think this was actually really helpful in our situation because there was a period of time where reoccurring weekly one-on-ones with you gave me like mild anxiety. Like you would over prepare or think about what feedback you're going to get, and it's easy to spiral a little bit to where when I eventually told you that I prefer more casual, frequent check-ins, whether it's about the business or about a people situation going on at work, that created a more productive conversation, like layout, I think. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting question.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Once you like establish the like foundation of trust with your boss,
Mhm.
then you kind of have more leeway to say, well, what I prefer is this is the most productive for me. And if your boss is can adapt to it, that's a good sign that I'm not saying I'm a good person to follow, but usually that's a good indicator that your boss is a good leader to follow. Um, and the next one is this is a long one. Amanda's story about regaining trust and moving back into the direct report circle was impressive. She mentioned that gossip should be avoided because it eventually circles back to her boss. Could Amanda or Mike share a couple of examples of behaviors that can damage trust or harm professional relationships between a direct report and your boss?
I have thoughts.
Go for it.
Um, I think most trust damage isn't like a dramatic event where something happens and the relationship is fractured. I think it's cumulative and compounding and often unintentional. I would hope it's unintentional and that you don't want to have a bad relationship with your manager. But a few common behaviors to answer the question, I think, is venting sideways. So, like in my scenario, sorry, Mike, you were the common enemy where I thought if my peer was also frustrated, we would be sharing in
Always.
that. And it wasn't genuine. They were finding ways to make me look bad. So venting sideways instead of bringing concerns directly to your manager is a mistake. Like your manager should get the feedback first before you ever share it with anybody else, or else you're not giving them the opportunity to adjust or explain. I also think getting defensive again or over explaining when feedback is given is something that can start to sour the relationship, and then surprising your boss with bad news. So when we talk about staying one step ahead, I think that applies in all areas in the workplace. And if you found out about something before it came from me, that puts you in a really bad spot with your manager and in your org. And then when you have multiple scenarios like this over time, it erodes at the trust, and all of these things signal risk, even if they're not bad intent in the beginning.
Yeah. I think when like someone in general, like, we all have that type of boss that they're just too busy to answer your question. They think you should already know about the answer, and it kind of creates a distance between you and your boss. You're too scared to ask. They're either too good to answer a question or something like that. So I'll answer this from the flip side of what, like in that situation, you can do to gain some trust from your boss. And this is not a silver bullet. You have to do it more consistently. But when you have a situation like that, like if you just ask your boss, how do I solve it? Like if you have a problem you don't know how to solve, your boss is like, I paid you so much to solve that, figure out yourself. And you're like, that doesn't answer my question, right? So you can reframe how you ask the question to build a trust. I think, Amanda, you did this quite often. I've done it with my boss, certainly, is I will ask them, well, when you were in my position, and you obviously navigated through very successfully because you are at where you're at today, of your level and position and title. How did you navigate through the complexity and ambiguity? And what strategies did you use? You ask them more open-ended question to share their perspective. I have never seen a boss who is like, I'm never going to tell you what I did during that period of time because people like bragging about how successful they are. And so that is just a different way of asking, how do you solve the problem without asking them directly how to solve the problem. You're asking their experience. And from their perspective, the more you have them talk, the more trust you gain from them. Even though you don't say a word, just how you word that question, immediately they will want to talk to you and talk about themselves. And the more you listen, the more they trust you. And so that's kind of on the flip side of this, of some like hacks or tips of what to ask or what to do as a direct report to form a healthy trust and relationship with your boss.
That's a good way of giving a compliment while
Right.
keeping it tactical and progressing on the current issue at hand. So I like that approach too.
Cool. We got 3 minutes left, so we'll take one last question. I once had a colleague in the same level with me, but she joined the group earlier and already built trust with our boss before I joined. She sometimes gossiped about me with my boss and complained about me. I'm worried that it can give my boss bad impression about me. How should I deal with this kind of situation?
I mean, you pretty much had this exact scenario.
You like my advice is you don't need to like overreact to
Mhm.
it because you can't control what the other person says about you. The only thing you can control is your reaction or no reaction to the situation. Again, like you're the person who builds trust. Like my philosophy is you should only talk to people, not talk about people. So
Mhm.
when you and your boss are building this partnership and trust, that actually overrides a lot of things. Like when you have a personal, like a relationship with someone, whatever whoever says about you, like you being almost like stoic to it, or you being like a trustworthy person will override all the rumors and gossip about you.
Yeah, I think the strongest response in this situation, and it's easier said than done, is to make sure that your work standards and accountability are very visible so that there's no room to interpret. Sort of like when I talked about the win log, it's very hard for your manager to be influenced by somebody else if you're producing results. And honestly, in my experience, this makes the person who is speaking poorly about you look worse because it's like, why are you focused on what your peer is doing instead of what your own department is doing? But I think that's where, like I said, focus on your side of the street. Anything you can do to show that you're meeting or exceeding expectations is where you focus, and then you don't give that a lot of energy. But I know sometimes that can be more emotionally draining than we give it credit for.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, but I would like what Amanda said is what I wanted to say. Cool. I think we're right at time. Again, if you need free resource or 15 minutes with me, you can go to my homepage on Maven and book a session with me. And otherwise, I think this class recording will probably be published in 48 hours, I think is Maven standard. Um, cool. I think that will wrap up this presentation. And again, I want to thank everyone to join this. Hopefully, this is helpful to everyone. All right. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New
Yeah.
Year.